Alright guys, now I talked about an old school faction before, not technically old school, but at least from the recent years, that really were consistently jobbing because of the poor way they've booked the storyline for the long term. And speaking about, I guess, the long term, but sort of to benefit at least one individual, like Wade Barrett was with the Netflix, with the Nexus. I was about to say Netflix. Legacy was one of the major factions around the late 2000s that ended around 2010. And I'm sick and tired of people bringing this up because Orton was the only person that was stealing the show, as was the Benefits, so the breakup can develop. While Orton was like hot potatoing the WWE Championship, feuding with Batista, Cena, Triple H, CM Punk. Like, only Ted DiBiase and Cody Rhodes didn't develop any character over all this except after the breakup. Well, Ted was just trying to be the $1 Million Man 2.0, less charisma, less heat, only with just a better looking body, but no type of like etchiness. There's no flair into any of these guys' character. They were just, the only thing you've had of note was them feuding over with DX over the past few months over the storyline of trying to help Orton regain the WWE title, and most of the time we're seeing him win it clean. So you could just say that he barely even needed over the faction, thanks he was already still a main event star over that point. There was even like more like generational talent that was the point of the Legacy faction. It's a new day! It's a new day! It's a new generation! It has a crappy, dated theme song that barely got any plays by anybody except if you remember those years. With, I think they had Sim Snuka, the bastard son or adopted son of Jimmy Snuka. Too bad that won't be relevant to anything. He used to be part of Deuce and Domino. And the only memorable part of his career was him being part of that tag team and taking that hit from Undertaker at WrestleMania 25. Yeah, that was him. And another jobber from the Yanawai family, that was not Umaga. Why didn't they have Umaga? So it was just Rhodes. It was just Rhodes, Ted DiBiase, and of course Orton. And bro, if you remember the 2008 to 2009 episodes of Raw, those were when the ratings were about to plummet, and you could say that's because it was the early development of the PG era. Not everybody wanted to watch something that felt like a kid's show. Orton was the only person that was trying to somewhat make Raw at least interesting with his interactions with Cena, Punk kicking his father. That whole storyline with the McMahons and Triple H was actually a highlight reel with him RKOing and then kissing Triple H's wife, then Punk kicking Vince McMahon in the head. All Cody and Ted did was just assist. Oh yeah, and that feud with Kofi Kingston that happened around late 2009. We're seeing a lot of development that involved over Orton rising to still getting the most heat, being the top heel, getting the most play-by, being still main-eventing, while no elevation came over Cody and Ted DiBiase's career. Except no knee pads, having a crappy theme song, and just tag teaming just to keep the guys busy. Until they broke them up to still tag team later on. And have a bit of a pseudo-feud with crappy theme songs. Well, like Dash and Cody Rhodes came after Legacy. And Ted DiBiase just being a mid-carder over jobbing out to Daniel Bryan when he was with Maurice. When he was given the $1 million belt. And they barely developed anything with that except him jobbing to Goldust. Like, people could just fondly remember over these factions and know how less incompetent they were to really elevating the viewership of what was going on. Because the only times the ratings even bumped up was because it was a road to WrestleMania, not because Legacy was that much of a top draw as at least what Evolution was doing back in like the early 2000s or to early to mid 2000s from that time. Because Evolution actually elevated stars. It got you to know who Kane, Rob Van Dam, Booker T, Chris Benoit, Scott Steiner. We all remember those feuds. Orton was already feuding over with established stars. Triple H, you could say the Reign of Terror was bad and all this shit, even though it's not true. Reign of Terror wasn't that bad. It got you to establish who the champ was, why the belt was more important, and there was bigger storylines. And most of the time, Triple H lost in embarrassing fashion, so he really got the guys over. So I feel like we're just not distinguishing the feud all because you just don't want to see a guy on top. It just makes more of the fans marks than it is actually realistically showing why the Reign of Terror was really bad. While Orton was like feuding with Shawn Michaels, Cena, and still not feeling like he was the top guy, except he was just with the nepotism. And most of the time, Orton be coming around doing the same thing Triple H does with the 20-minute promos, trying to look, scoveling and trying to feel like he's above it all. Always trying to, name value alone and by looks alone, try to get his team over. And then he feuds for the next couple months. And most of the time, it doesn't even affect what happens over the locker room. Legacy is just... Evolution had this clout about them. You see the cool factor. You see them popping up in the level with the limousines, popping champagnes after the win. They always had the GM in a chokehold, or else they had a chip all over their shoulder. First, they had name value. They had youthful talent that can at least keep up with most of the elevated stars in the league, in the roster, and still had like main event pedigree. While Randy Orton was the only world champion there, and Cody and Ted were just lower mids that look like your college frat, with one guy Orton that looks like he developed like a sudden traumatization for something. These guys don't look cool. They all look greased up. They all look like metrosexual jobbers. And sure, it's just my opinion. If that's how you feel, of course that's how I feel, or else I wouldn't be talking about it. I know people possibly liked Legacy or liked some of the storylines, which I bet you only like the Randy Orton storylines, because you could barely name me 3 or 5 feuds that Cody Rhodes and Ted DiBiase really had, except with the feud with DX, the breakup back at Night of Champions, and then the blow off into their breakup around 2010. And then nothing else, because these guys were still up to the lower middle card around that time. So this barely did much to elevate, other than what Triple H did. So, if you guys feel that way, sorry. But in my opinion, I felt like Evolution Legacy barely did much to impact the show. It was just a launching pad, all because Orton was more established around that time. And most of the time, whenever he's feuding, people forget that he even was part of Legacy. I nearly did. It never felt like it, other than 2 guys just slowly walking like they're behind a slow explosion of an entrance, where it's going to take 5 minutes for them to try to feel like they look cool, all because they're greased up with abs. With no charisma. You know how boring it is you know how sad it is to make a person that looks the part and they look terrible at it when you give them the role? Like, that's how it feels whenever you look at Legacy. And the only thing you guys remember from that brief moment over with Legacy was the Kofi Kingston feud and the Triple H feud and the Cena feud. and and that's about it. Because Shawn Michaels was like '07. That was before Legacy. And Batista. And Shane McMahon. And most of the time they were jobbing out to those guys anyway. We didn't have the bounty hunt angle with Goldberg like we had back in '03, or the Benoit Road to WrestleMania, or the Eugene storyline, or like anybody like Ric Flair or Triple H whenever they feuded with Shawn Michaels. All those were the Rob Van Dam feud, the Kane feud. All those are memorable, and all of them involved evolution. None of the other main event storylines that happened with Orton actually felt like Legacy played a major factor or had a chip over their shoulder, even though they had the son of the Cody Rhodes and somebody that's supposed to be financially stacked like the son of the Ted DiBiase. In It was only name value alone. There was no pedigree in sight. No pun intended. So this faction sucked. If you guys feel differently, or you can change my opinion over in the comment section below. That's it for me. Thanks for watching the DSC show.